The phone rang while I was sitting in my car, engine off, keys still warm in my palm. I knew it was bad before I answered. My father never called me directly anymore. The workshop doors were open across the yard, coughing out heat and noise. Sparks jumped from a cutting table. Someone was shouting measurements. The place looked exactly the same as it had my entire life. Loud, frantic, dependent. I let the phone ring longer than necessary, then I answered. "We have a problem," my father said. His voice was tight, stripped of authority. No greeting, no small talk. I leaned back in the seat and watched dust float in the sunlight. "What kind of problem?" He hesitated. That pause told me everything. "Our biggest client is uneasy," he said. "They're asking questions." I smiled despite myself. Questions were my department. They always had been. "What kind of questions?" I asked. "The kind only you usually handle." There it was. I didn't say anything. Silence can be a weapon if you hold it long enough. "They specifically asked for you," he added, quieter now. Not a demand, a plea. For a moment I imagined getting out of the car, walking back inside, rolling up my sleeves, fixing it like I always had, watching relief flood his face, watching the system breathe again because I'd stepped back under the weight. Instead I said, "Everything they need is documented." Another pause, sharper this time. "They don't want documents," he said. "They want reassurance." I laughed. It slipped out before I could stop it. Low, almost kind. "I'll call you back," I said, and ended the call before he could say my name again. That was the moment the story changed. But to understand why I didn't go back inside, why I stayed in my car while the business I grew up in started to shake, you need to know how I got there. You need to know what they took from me long before they tried to take my silence. I used to believe graduation would fix everything. I believed that walking across that stage, accepting that degree, would finally make me visible in a way I hadn't been before. Proof that I wasn't just useful. Proof that I was capable. I was wrong. A few days after the ceremony, I was back in my father's office, looking for routine paperwork. The kind of task I'd done so often I could find files with my eyes closed. That's when I found the folder. Thin, clean, labeled like it didn't expect to be questioned. I opened it without thinking. At first, the words didn't land. They slid past me, neat and professional, like a language designed to keep emotion out. Then I saw my sister's name. Again and again. I saw phrases like transition, realignment, leadership continuity. I saw my name once. Not under leadership, not under ownership, under support. A temporary role, a phase-out, a plan already moving forward without me. I stood there longer than I should have, the office too quiet, the air too still, as something cold settled in my chest. They hadn't forgotten me. They had planned around me. I grew up in that workshop, not visiting it, belonging to it. I learned the rhythm of machines before I learned how to relax. The smell of oil lived in my clothes, my hair, my skin. It followed me into classrooms and later into dorm rooms, no matter how much detergent I used. While other kids talked about weekends, I learned how to spot small failures before they became disasters. I learned how to stay quiet, how to be reliable, how to fix things without being asked. People came to me when systems stalled, when orders went sideways, when something needed hands and judgment, not speeches, even when my father was standing a few steps away. I thought that meant something. My father talked about legacy like it was sacred, family, sacrifice, building something from nothing. He sounded powerful when he said it, especially to clients. To me, he mostly talked about what still needed doing. My mother cared less about the workshop and more about how it looked from the outside, clean branding, the right people seeing the right version of us. With her, expectations were never spoken. You were supposed to feel them, and if you disappointed her, you learned what invisibility really felt like. My sister drifted through it all effortlessly. Clean shoes, polished smiles. She never stayed long enough to get dirty. She knew how to look important without ever lifting anything heavy. My parents looked at her like a future. They looked at me like a guarantee. For years, I told myself it was fine, that loyalty would be rewarded, that endurance meant something, that once I had something official in my hands, things would change. I didn't realize my role had been decided long before I ever had a chance to prove myself. And I definitely didn't realize that the moment I stopped absorbing the pressure, the whole system would start to show its cracks. That comes next. The next morning, I went back to work like nothing had happened. Same boots, same worn jeans, same nods to people who had trusted me for years without ever knowing how little protection I had. From the outside, I looked unchanged. Inside, something fundamental had snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically. It broke the way a support beam does when it's been carrying too much weight for too long. Clean. Final. I didn't quit. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't raise my voice or demand answers. I simply stopped doing what I had never been paid or thanked to do. When the workday ended, I cleaned my station, shut off the light above my bench, and left. No lingering, no late night, just one more thing. No fixing problems from my car with the engine running. At first, no one noticed. That's the funny thing about being the backbone of a system. When you're there, everyone assumes the structure is strong on its own. The systems I'd built over years didn't collapse right away. They stretched, absorbed the strain the way they always had, because I'd designed them to. But without me smoothing the edges, things began to fray. A supplier called mid-morning, confused about specifications I'd always clarified before questions were even asked. I transferred the call to the office and went back to my work. A client emailed late one evening with technical concerns. I replied politely the next morning and looped in management instead of solving it myself. Meetings started running long. Decisions stalled. Discussions that used to take minutes turned into circular debates filled with impressive-sounding words and very little movement. I watched it all from a careful distance. The guilt crept in quietly. These were people I cared about, people who had worked beside me for years. My instinct was to step back in, to fix things before the strain reached them. But then I remembered the folder, the plan. The way my future had been reduced to a support role with an expiration date. And I reminded myself of the truth. If I kept cushioning the consequences, nothing would ever change. Outside the workshop, something unexpected started to happen. A supplier I'd known for years pulled me aside during a routine pickup. He lowered his voice, glancing around like he didn't want anyone else to hear. "You staying here long term?" he asked. I hesitated. Just long enough. He nodded like the answer was already written on my face. "Whatever you do," he said, "you're good. People notice." A few days later, a client emailed me privately, not through the company address, directly. They thanked me for a recent project. Then they asked, carefully, respectfully, whether I'd ever consider working independently. I didn't respond right away. But for the first time since graduation, I allowed myself to imagine a future that didn't require begging to be seen. That's when my phone rang. My father's name lit up the screen. He didn't usually call me during work hours. He preferred proximity, orders passed in hallways, expectations delivered without documentation. I answered. "We have a situation," he said immediately. I leaned against my truck, the workshop humming behind me like a restless animal. "What kind of situation?" I asked. "Our biggest client is concerned," he said. "They're asking questions, technical ones." I waited. "They specifically asked for you." There it was again, the thing they only remembered when they needed it. "I've documented everything," I said calmly. "It's all in the system." "They don't want documentation," he snapped, frustration leaking through. "They want reassurance." Reassurance? I thought of all the nights I'd stayed late so clients would never feel uncertain, all the problems I'd fixed before they ever became visible. "I'll call you back," I said, and this time I didn't feel bad when I ended the call. That evening was family dinner. Same house, same polished table, same carefully curated normalcy. I arrived exactly on time. No early help, no extra effort. My mother was adjusting plates that didn't need adjusting. My sister arrived moments later, immaculate, phone already in her hand. My father followed, carrying a bottle of wine like everything was under control. We sat. Small talk floated across the table. My sister mentioned a post that had done well online. My mother nodded approvingly. My father commented on the weather. It felt rehearsed, like a scene they'd practiced without me. I reached into my bag and placed a slim folder in the center of the table. No one touched it. "What's that?" my father asked. "You know what it is," I said. My mother's hand stilled. My sister glanced at the folder, then back to her phone. I opened it and slid it closer to them. "I found this by accident," I said, "but it explains a lot." My father read it. His jaw tightened. My mother didn't look at the page. She looked at me. "This is business planning," she said calmly. "You weren't meant to see it yet." "Yet," I repeated. "So there was a time you planned to tell me I was being phased out." My sister finally looked up. "You're overreacting," she said lightly. "It's just structure." "Structure that gives you everything," I said, turning to her, "and gives me nothing." My father tried to speak, failed. My mother sighed, practiced disappointment heavy in the sound. "You've always been good with your hands," she said. "That's your strength. Leadership takes a different kind of mind." There it was, clean, final, undeniable. "You mean I'm useful," I said slowly, "but not worthy." "That's not what I said," my father rushed in. "It's exactly what you said," I replied, "just spread out over years." Then his phone buzzed. He checked it, froze, stood. "I need to take this." When he came back, his face had changed. "It's the client," he said. "They're not comfortable proceeding." My sister scoffed. "They're bluffing." "They're not," he snapped. He turned to me. "They're asking for you. They said if you're not involved, they're reconsidering." I met his eyes. "I told you," I said quietly. "Everything you need is documented." "They don't want documents," he said. "They want the person they trust." My mother looked confused now. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "the relationship was with me." Another buzz. My father's hand shook as he read the message. "They're pulling out," he said. "Effective immediately." Silence fell. Not loud, not dramatic. Final. "You could stop this," he said to me. I shook my head. "No," I said. I can't. Not anymore." I stood, gathered the folder, and walked out. No one followed me. And that's when I realized something that would change everything next. They hadn't given the business to my sister. They had given it away because they thought I'd never stop holding it together. The morning after I walked out, I didn't wake up to alarms or urgent messages. I woke up to quiet. That alone should have told me how much of my nervous system had been trained to expect emergencies. For years, silence meant something was wrong. Now it meant something had finally stopped demanding pieces of me. I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and wrote down everything I had quietly absorbed over the years. Client relationships I'd maintained after hours, emergency fixes no one else knew how to handle, technical oversight that lived entirely in my head, problems solved before they were ever reported. The list kept growing. Seeing it in ink tightened my chest, not with pride, but with clarity. This wasn't dedication. It was dependency. By late morning, my phone started ringing. First my father, then my mother, then my sister. I let every call go to voicemail. When I finally responded, it wasn't with emotion. It was with structure. I sent a short email, professional, calm, almost boring. Effective immediately, I would no longer be providing unpaid labor, informal consulting, or emergency support. Any future involvement would require a written agreement outlining compensation, authority, and scope of responsibility. No drama, no threats, just boundaries. My mother replied first. She said I was being cold, that I was tearing the family apart, that I was choosing money over loyalty. I didn't argue. I forwarded her message to my attorney. Because here's the truth, no one teaches you early enough. Loyalty without protection isn't love, it's exposure. And I had been exposed for a very long time. The workshop didn't collapse immediately. That's not how systems fail. They stall first. They strain. They start revealing exactly where the pressure has been hidden. Suppliers began asking questions no one could answer quickly. Clients requested meetings that kept getting postponed. Internal emails grew longer, more frantic, heavier with words like urgent and critical. My father called again, this time calmer, measured, careful. "Let's talk," he said. "We can figure something out." "We can," I agreed, "through lawyers." That ended the call. I finished documenting everything I'd already committed to. Clean handoffs, clear timelines, no sabotage, no chaos. I didn't burn bridges, I closed one. For the first time since graduation, my days were my own. The quiet felt strange at first, like standing in a room after a machine shuts off and your ears keep ringing. Then it felt peaceful. I slept through the night. I ate meals without checking my phone. I felt my shoulders drop from a position they'd been locked in for years. The tension didn't disappear overnight, but it loosened its grip. About a week later, an email arrived from someone I recognized but had never spoken to outside of work. Someone who had watched me operate without ever seeing the politics behind it. She didn't ask about my family. She didn't ask about the fallout. She asked about my availability. We met for coffee on a quiet weekday morning. No machines humming, no urgency in the air, no expectation that I prove my loyalty before being taken seriously. She listened while I explained how I worked, how I approached systems already under strain, how I prevented crises instead of reacting to them. When I finished, she nodded once and said something so simple it almost knocked the breath out of me. "That's exactly what we need." The terms were clear. Fair pay, defined authority, real boundaries, no late-night emergencies disguised as favors, no vague promises about someday. Everything was written down. Everything was respected. For the first time in my adult life, my calendar belonged to me. I didn't wake up with dread in my chest. I didn't feel guilty for leaving work on time. I noticed things I hadn't noticed in years. How quiet mornings could be. How food tasted better when eaten slowly. How my body felt when it wasn't bracing for impact. My phone rang less often. When it did, I chose whether to answer. My parents still reached out. Their messages circled the truth without ever landing on it. My father talked about regret without naming it. My mother talked about family without acknowledging damage. My sister posted more than ever, confident captions, polished images, but something about them felt thinner now. Louder, like reassurance meant for herself. I didn't respond, not out of spite, out of clarity. I realized I didn't need their recognition to validate what I already knew. I had built value quietly for years. I had survived being overlooked, minimized, and underestimated. And now, for the first time, none of that defined me. But the story wasn't finished yet. Because systems built on silence don't accept change gracefully. The apology didn't come wrapped in the word sorry. It came dressed as concern. My father called on a quiet afternoon, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Not frantic this time, careful, almost humble. "We're struggling," he said. "Things are unstable." I didn't respond right away. I'd learned that silence made people reveal more than questions ever did. "We didn't realize how much you were carrying," he added. "We underestimated the scope of what you handled." There it was, the closest thing to accountability he knew how to offer. "I see," I said. He exhaled, like that was permission. "We want to fix this, bring you back in properly, make things right." Make things right. I almost laughed. "What does that look like?" I asked. Another pause, then words that sounded rehearsed. "Consulting," he said. "Short term, until things stabilize." Short-term help, long-term control. "And authority?" I asked. "Well," he said slowly, "we'd need to maintain final decisions." Of course they would. I thanked him for the honesty and told him I'd think about it. That night, my mother texted. She didn't mention the business. She never did when she wanted leverage. She mentioned history, memories, sacrifice. We did everything for you girls. Families make mistakes. This doesn't have to be permanent. Permanent. As if I'd left out of stubbornness instead of survival. My sister tried next. Her message was brief, casual, almost cheerful. You really let this go far. No apology, no acknowledgement, just irritation that the system wasn't bending back into place. I sat with all of it longer than I expected. Not because I was tempted, because I was grieving. I was grieving the family I'd believed in, the idea that fairness would eventually win, that being indispensable would make me safe. But grief doesn't mean you go back to what hurt you. A few days later, my attorney forwarded me something interesting. A notice. They were restructuring again, quietly, quickly. They were trying to rebuild the system without admitting it had ever depended on me. That's when I realized something important. They weren't sorry they'd sidelined me, they were sorry it hadn't worked. I declined the consulting offer, politely, in writing. I explained that without real authority, real equity, and a formal acknowledgement of my role, there was nothing to discuss. My father didn't reply. My mother sent one final message accusing me of holding grudges. I didn't answer. Because here's the truth no one warns you about. When you stop being useful, people who benefited from your silence will call it cruelty. The weeks passed. My new work deepened, expanded. People asked my opinion and waited for it. When I spoke, it mattered. The contrast was almost disorienting. No one questioned my presence. No one made me earn the right to sit at the table. I was assumed competent from the start. That did more to heal me than any apology ever could have. Then one evening, I ran into someone I used to work with. Someone who still worked at the workshop. He looked tired, older. "They talk about you all the time," he said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. "In a good way?" He gave a sad smile. "In a we should have listened way." That night, I slept better than I had in years, because the hardest part was over. The last message I ever received about the business came months later. Not from my parents, not from my sister, from a former client. They wrote to tell me they were moving their work, that they'd followed me, not the name on the building, that they trusted how I thought, not how things were branded. They didn't ask permission, they just chose. That's when it finally settled in, not as anger, not as triumph, but as fact. They had never given the business to my sister. They had given it away because they thought I would always stay. I didn't feel the need to respond to anyone else after that. The workshop continued, smaller, slower, louder in its struggle than it had ever been when I was there. My parents adjusted in ways I no longer managed. My sister kept posting, smiling wider than necessary, captions heavier than before. I didn't watch closely. I had other things to build. My days filled with work that respected my time, with decisions that didn't require justification, with evenings that belonged to me instead of emergencies disguised as loyalty tests. Sometimes people ask if I regret walking away. I tell them no, because regret assumes there was something worth staying for. What I left behind wasn't opportunity. It was a system that survived on my silence and called it family. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need vindication. I didn't need apologies that came too late and asked too little. What I needed was space. Space to stop bracing. Space to hear myself think. Space to decide what I would and would not give away. I used to believe being needed was the same as being valued. That if I worked harder, stayed longer, sacrificed more, someone would eventually look at me and say, "You belong here." Walking away taught me something better. Belonging doesn't come from endurance. It comes from choice. I didn't start over. I started free. And if you're reading this and it feels familiar, if you've ever been told you were useful but not worthy, remember this. You don't need permission to leave a place that keeps hurting you. You don't owe loyalty to systems built on your silence. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't staying. It's choosing yourself and walking forward without looking back. Please click the subscribe button, like, share, and comment. This will encourage me to make more interesting stories. Also, let's know where you are watching from. Thank you and see you in the next story.